welcome back to another episode of the Set at Home Mom, and today I want to talk about sex education at the elementary level. And I want to kind of give you more of a teacher's perspective on that, since I did work in the elementary schools for about 10 years. And it's kind of become a bit more of a controversial thing regarding some stuff in California, and I'm not going to claim to know everything about that, even though I've done, listened to different people talk about that. So kind of what the idea is that at the elementary level, it's kind of more under the guise of health education, that we're teaching kids things about their body and such like that. But kind of what it kind of looks like is talking about their genitalia, gender identity, sexuality, and family structures, appropriate and inappropriate touching. Now, I'm going to say all those things are necessarily bad. The issue is that it's the schools addressing this, whether that is someone from the outside coming in to discuss this with kids, a counselor or a teacher. I don't know, but I'm just going to, for the sake of this video, I'm going to say it's going to come down to a lot of the teacher, because even if someone comes in to discuss this and they leave, well, who's left when the kids still have questions? The teacher. And I think that teacher's still going to be expected to answer those questions for students. And I'm also only focusing at the elementary level because that's what I taught in, and I think it's very different at the secondary level. I had no, especially at the elementary level, there was no kind of sex education at the elementary level, and obviously it did not hinder my growth and development, supposedly lacking some knowledge. So kids are expected to learn about their genitalia, and we're just going to say for the most part that's to learn all the correct names for it. Now, what makes this kind of strange is that teachers aren't typically teaching students in general that, hey, this is your head, these is your hands, you can do things with your hands. Kids don't do that, but yet, teachers don't teach that to kids because they already kind of know it. Yet we're placing this expectation that, okay, now the schools need to teach about other body parts, and then we're talking about appropriate and inappropriate touching. And I don't think this is necessarily wrong, because I think kids do need to hear it. So I have probably less of an issue with that so much, because sometimes you never know when one of the parents could actually be the abuser, even though when it comes to that, that's still pretty rare for it to be the parent. And it's definitely the parent needs to be addressing that. If you're not addressing things like appropriate and inappropriate touching with your children, then you really need to. That's very important for their safety, just like you teach them not to run out into a busy street or anything. And I do address this stuff with my children as it's come across in understanding the who, what, when, where, why, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate kind of thing. Then it's also teaching kids about gender and gender identity. And I think that's really just, personal opinion is I think it's just really teaching confusion to kids, because you're making them think about things that they otherwise most kids probably would not think about. And saying that some boys feel like girls and some girls feel like boys, or saying that boys really are girls and girls really can be boys, is just, you're putting things into a kid's head at that age that most kids are not thinking about. Yes, there are some kids that are thinking about that. And I know that there is some gender stereotypes that I think can probably create some confusion. And that's kind of a whole nother topic that could be addressed elsewhere. But for the sake of this, it's teaching kids about gender identity. And we do know that people hold to different beliefs on that, because there are some parents that will teach their kids, oh yeah, whatever you feel like goes. And then there's going to be some parents be like, no, this is the way God created people, male and female. Okay? And then we've got teaching kids about sexuality and saying that some boys like boys and some boys like girls. Like, kids do not need to really be like intentionally told to think about these things. Some kids are going to think about them and some are not. I pretty much just thought boys were all really gross and I didn't want to touch one. But that didn't mean I was like gay. Like, I just thought they were gross, and most of them were kind of stinky, and I didn't like the things that they liked. I like to play with little girls. Okay, that's pretty typical. But I did know girls that liked boys, you know, maybe once they got to about that 4th grade age and you had some boyfriend and girlfriend kind of stuff, and you know, kids were just imitating adults at that point most of the time. And then sometimes usually a lot under that is going with sexuality is kind of teaching kids about the different family structures and that how some families can be heterosexual or homosexual, and they may not necessarily use those words. But they don't usually address polygamy and that, oh, some families have 1 dad and 3 moms, because that's still considered taboo. So to my knowledge, I don't think any of that's ever addressed in this type curriculum. But it's imposing a certain moral view upon children. And people are going to say, well, these are just the facts, right? Whereas, well, okay, maybe it's factual to a degree, but when you do have a country where a lot of people still are religious and hold to certain religious beliefs, like you're telling them, well, this is okay and normal, and that's going very much against what the parents say. Because I do believe that in schools, the belief system dominated is secular humanism and not any other belief system. So, and then you're expecting the teacher to have to teach this stuff, which makes, like, as a teacher, like, that would make me super, super uncomfortable to have to talk to kids about that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not saying that I couldn't or haven't on a one-on-one basis in certain circumstances where I did have a student that would kind of touch himself. He had a disability and he kind of didn't, you know, understand sometimes what was socially appropriate and inappropriate and had to be addressed. And it was first and foremost addressed with his mother to know what the plan was in place and that it was being addressed at home. So there was definitely like, it was a parent-teacher kind of thing going on. And it was still very uncomfortable for me to do, but you know, I realized like, okay, I was in special education. Like, it kind of was my job to make sure it was being addressed appropriately. But it wasn't like I was trying or going out of my way to go ahead and teach this kid stuff. It was like I had to modify a behavior to an appropriate manner, in a sense. And I would have kids ask me when I was pregnant for 3 times. I would have kids ask me, where does the baby come from? How does the baby come out? And I would just go, you can talk to your parents about that. Because for what a kid needs to know can very much depend on their age and where they are developmentally, and like, how much information do you really want your kid to know? My kids ask and I'm like, I'm not ready to tell them the details of that until I think they are old enough and ready to understand and learn that information. Not trying to hide away from it or be embarrassed. It's just, well, it is a little embarrassing, I guess, to talk about. And it's the thought of having to address, like, specifically address gender identity and sexuality would also be a violation of a teacher's religious beliefs. Okay, just because, like, there's this whole notion that your religion is only acceptable in your home or in your church, essentially, and that somehow when you walk out that door and go do your job, you're supposed to completely drop your religious beliefs out the door. And that's totally not true. Like, why would agnosticism and atheism get to be the neutral position, or calling it the neutral position, and like, that's the acceptable point of view? But for a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or a Hindu or whatever, that they're supposed to check their beliefs out the door, but the atheist and agnostic doesn't necessarily have to, and that's not right. And you'll say, well, the teacher just needs to do the job that they were hired for. Well, first of all, we weren't hired to teach your kids about sex and health. I was hired to teach your kid how to read and write, essentially. And it would also require me to lie. And Thou shalt not lie is one of the 10 commandments. And I think any human being, religious or not, knows that lying is wrong. Okay? People will say, well, little white lies are okay. But to require a teacher that affirms to God's standards that he created them male and female, and sit there and say to kids that, oh, it's totally normal to feel like the opposite, and it's not normal. I believe that in the rare occasion that a child feels that way, it's because they do have an underlying disorder. And I did have a student that expressed some gender identity issues, and it was kind of handled at a one-on-one basis, and he kind of had a past to him that I think kind of opened the door for certain things. It's about as much information I'm gonna give you. And I even had this kid that wasn't even my student when I was pregnant, and I didn't know the gender, and they're like, oh, well, hopefully it's a girl, and if it's a boy, you can just change it to a girl because boys are really gross. And I was like, that's not how that works. But I would have been almost like required to just lie and be like, oh yeah, that could do that. That can happen. And where I taught in a fairly conservative area, I mean, I did have kids with parents that were, well, they were usually heterosexual and then became homosexual, and, you know, they weren't treated any different, and I loved the parents just as much as the other parents. It kind of really didn't matter. And then you're gonna have, okay, so the teachers that are going to be able to talk about this stuff with your kids, and because even if you have like a counselor or a professional coming in to talk about these kids, the kids are still going to talk about it with their teachers, because that's kind of what they do. And you have teachers that are basically sexual predators in the schools. When you find like there's like those child pornography busts, there's always teachers on the list. Okay? There are teachers in the schools that are sexual predators. Okay? I was in a school where there was a teacher that has had allegations brought against him. I don't know yet at the time if they have been proven in court, but that's pretty scary to think that he would have been allowed to discuss that kind of stuff with children. And that's just that's a way for grooming to happen. That's how grooming works. So you would be kind of allowing those predators to get to talk about that kind of stuff. And who knows, it can motivate. I think some teachers probably do become teachers because they like kids in a more sexual manner. And just, I've seen some creepy teachers out there before. It can happen, and that should be something that we shouldn't want those people like that to have an influence on our children at such a young age. And it's just another way for the state to take over parental responsibility and parental control, because parents sometimes don't want to discuss anything like that with their kids, which is very wrong. And there are parents that can sometimes just only give them one view of that. And you have people say, well, my parents never talked about it, so that's why I needed sex education in school. And it's like, well, no, did you really? Because what do you know now, or that you have discovered on your own? Like, and like I said, what really needs to be done at the elementary level? I had nothing at the elementary level, and obviously I've learned everything I needed to know by the time I was, going to be sexually active, when I was getting married and stuff like that. Like, I just could learn that information. What I would have learned in elementary school would have had no impact on my education whatsoever. So it's just it's completely unnecessary. And if you kind of look at the groups that are kind of putting behind this, like, there's enough of red flags to go, well, it's a certain group of people that are trying to push for this kind of stuff. And I really don't think I don't really think the people behind it have good intentions. I really, really just, I don't think they do. Maybe some do, but I really just don't do. I really think it's just a sinister way to get their hands on children and just let it creep in little by little. I've heard this story of this woman that used to work for Planned Parenthood, and she has said a lot of stuff about what the point of sex education programs are. Now, this would have been in the 80s or 90s, so things could have changed. I'll benefit of the doubt, things could have changed. But she said, like, what we would do is when we'd come at the elementary schools with kindergartners is we would say, what does your mommy and daddy call your private parts? And then the person, she would go, like, kind of laugh and giggle it. And then pretty soon all the kids are sharing that information and they're all laughing. And the goal was to kind of desensitize them to that kind of stuff. We already know, like, a lot of the brain studies that like a child seeing porn can have an effect on their brain. And there's a possibility that some of the sex education materials includes showing kids pictures and images. I think they're usually in a cartoon version. So there's still, I mean, that's kind of like this huge gray area. And, you know, parents just need to do their job. Quit letting the state doing it, and quit letting the state kind of convince you that you're not capable of doing it and that they just need to do it for you. Because, like I said, just some of those people just don't have good intentions. They are there to brainwash, indoctrinate your kids, get them to just, like, they need to be the ultimate authority, and the goal would to undermine parental authority. And that's sad and scary, guys. So I just wanted to give you a basics on that. You can leave me a comment providing more information that I might be lacking. Like I said, I'm just trying to cover like a few, you know, main areas, focusing so much more on the elementary level and not the secondary level, because I think that can be a whole nother topic in itself. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe.